One problem with half-truths is you don't know which half to believe. Let's examine some of the claims made about Common Core in order to reveal what's behind the wizard's curtain. Are Common Core state standards in fact internationally benchmarked? This is important if Common Core is really meant to make U.S. students, quote, globally competitive. Common Core promoters make this claim, but have not supplied any proof to panel experts. Stanford professor James Milgren, the only mathematician on the validation panel, concluded math standards imposed, quote, significantly lower expectations with respect to algebra and geometry and the published standards of other countries. Professor Goodman of New York University agrees with Milgram. Are the standards sufficiently rigorous to prepare students for college? Algebra 1 has been delayed from 8th grade to 9th grade. Division moves from 5th grade to 6th grade. All prime factorization, common denominators, conversions of fractions and decimals, and algebraic manipulations are de-emphasized or eschewed. Traditional Euclidean geometry is replaced with an experimental and untested approach. No wonder Professors Milgram and Goodman are concerned about rigor. Michelle Malkin gets to the core of the problem when she states, quote, instead of doing the grunt work of hammering timetables and the basic functions into kids' heads, the faddists have turned to wacky, wordy, non-math alternatives to encourage, quote, conceptual understanding without the mastery of the fundamentals of math. Zeev Werman, software architect, electrical engineer, math advisor in California and D.C., offered a stinging critique of Common Core when he states that, quote, it marks the cessation of educational standards improvement in the U.S. No state has any reason left to aspire for first-rate students, as all states will be judged by the same mediocre benchmarks enforced by the federal government. Werman further states, moreover, there are organizations that have reasons to work for lower and less demanding standards, specifically teachers' unions and professional teacher organizations. While they may not admit it, they have a vested interest in lowering the accountability bar of their members. This will be done in the name of critical thinking and 21st century skills. And in faraway Washington, D.C., well beyond the reach of parents in most states and employers. Common Core English standards were hotly critiqued by Professor Stotsky, who served on the Common Core Committee. Stotsky blew the whistle and refused to approve the English language standards. She concluded, an English curriculum overloaded with advocacy journalism or with information articles chosen for their topic and/or political nature should raise serious concerns among parents, school leaders, and policymakers. Professor Stotsky also questioned the rigor of the standards by stating, Common Core standards not only present a serious threat to the state and local education authority, but also put academic quality at risk. Pushing fatally flawed education standards into America's schools is not the way to improve education. We criticize politicians for flip-flopping, but they're not the only perpetrators. Not long ago, the emphasis in public education to treat each student as an individual having distinctly different educational needs. With Common Core, every teacher must teach the same thing in the same way across the country. Common Core requires the reading of more dull instructional texts and less literature. This fails to recognize that children are drawn into reading by interesting and excellent stories. They won't be less motivated by reading dry, dull stuff. There's a lot of information citizens have not been told about Common Core on purpose. The very phrase Common Core state standards is intentionally misleading. States didn't lead the initiative. The funding came from the Gates Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education. Money was siphoned to private and non-public entities. Truth be known, both the National Governors Association and the Councils of Chief State School Officers are Washington, D.C.-based lobbies, not publicly accountable government organization. Plus, Achieve Incorporated, which actually wrote the standards. Later on, we'll further examine the money trail. The federal government claims they were not involved in the development of Common Core. While this claim is technically true, it's extremely misleading. Their goal is to have uniform national standards. The current administration supports that goal and has found carrot-and-stick approaches to pressure states into adopting Common Core. First, by making the race to the top funding contingent on state adoption. Second, by denying Title I funding to states failing to adopt the standards. Much heralded government transparency is absent from these devious approaches. It's not just the National Security Agency that goes around collecting our private information. It's also one of the more abhorrent aspects of Common Core. States are required to build massive student databases in order to receive 2009 federal stimulus funding and to qualify for the Race to the Top education funding program. States had to track 400 data points. Data has to be shared with the testing consortium and the U.S. Department of Education. Even more disturbing, any entity, public or private, would be able to access this data. Designed expressly to make individual student data available, can you imagine the privacy concerns? An alarming example of data mining gone wild recently happened in Maryland. Sophomore students in the Montgomery County School were asked a variety of inappropriate questions. Topics included race, religion, household income, sexual orientation, and the political identification of the students' parents. The students were also asked to opine on issues including legalization of marijuana, Obamacare, banning assault rifles, same-sex marriage, which party should be blamed for the 2013 government shutdown, and, of course, the environment. How could anyone really believe that such invasions of privacy would ever contribute to improved public education? Data mining is the #1 dirty little secret. That's not so little. And it's bankrolled by people of all political persuasions. The ultra-liberal Gates Foundation gave $100 million to fund the massive database. The plan was to share student information with private companies such as Gates Microsoft that sell educational products and services. The data system was actually developed by Amplify Education, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News. Is this private information safe and secure? Gates and Murdoch turned it over to a company called InBloom to, quote, operate and control. If you look at the InBloom website, they acknowledge that stored student data cannot be guaranteed. Quote, while in this day and age, no security protections can be 100% guaranteed, InBloom has greatly improved student data protection beyond the measures currently used by most school systems, unquote. Is Common Core really about education, or is it about indoctrination? You be the judge. A mom and attorney felt so strong she wrote a book called Credentialed to Destroy: How and Why Education Has Become a Weapon. Robin Eubanks opposes Common Core. Her book details massive extensive evidence that education has become an invisible and purposeful means of reconstructing the West, especially in the U.S., away from individualism and capitalism towards a more collectivist orientation in the future, a goal that guides the actual Common Core implementation. So here's the Common Core's second dirty little secret that's not little at all: indoctrination. John Dewey, one of the first proponents of America having public schools, wrote in 1896, "You can't make socialists out of individualists. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone is interdependent." Should our public schools teach children how to think or what to think? Educate or indoctrinate? There's a buzzword to sell new textbooks: Common Core aligned. Here's some examples of indoctrination included in these books. The idea that humans are causing global warming is treated as a scientifically proven fact. Traditional family beliefs are challenged, including American sovereignty, parental rights, and freedom of religion. Also, it promotes subjects including abortion rights, population control, and gay marriage. Specific examples of indoctrination in, quote, informational texts include The Cost Conundrum, Healthcare Costs in McAllen, Texas, which chastises medical professionals and calls for universal government-run healthcare. Also, Executive Order 13423, which mandates a sweeping call for sustainability, greenhouse gas control, and the use of renewable resources, as well as recycling at all federal agencies. How kids can get their way by nagging your parents. The recommended English textbooks for first graders teaches how to use negative feelings instead of reason to get your way, how to employ anger, fear, and guilt to elicit a wanted response. The lessons seem to be intended to disrupt the parent-child relationship. For example, telling a parent they are nagging when they ask you to help clean up your room, which according to them is an attempt to elicit parental guilt. Common Core lessons sneak politics into the 5th grade classrooms, an exercise supposedly used to teach the shortening of sentences by using possessive nouns included these questions. Question number 4, he, quote, the president's, makes sure the country's laws are fair. Which is untrue. That's the job of the judiciary, not the executive branch. Question number 5 on the test says, just because the government official says something makes it law. Question number 6 says, This minimizes the importance of the individual to our nation. What gives schools the right to ask children political questions? Here's a 6th grade survey entitled, "Are You a Democrat or a Republican?" Kids were told not to talk about the survey and not to show their parents. It contained misleading questions and intended to convince students which political party they support. One example was gay marriage. Quote, "Should you be able to marry whoever you want to?" If the child agreed, chalk up 1 for the Democrats. "Should you only be able to marry someone from the opposite sex?" That's 1 for the Republicans. Another example related to the military. Quote, "Spend less on sending troops away for war and give more to veterans that fought." Child was a Democrat. "Spend more for sending troops and don't give veterans any more than we have to." Made them a Republican. There were 10 questions on that survey. Depending on which party receives the most vote, the child was told what party they favored. Other issues included abortion, gun control, health care, taxes, death penalty, school prayer, pollution, and flag burning.